Good day. This is Anthony Barbera. I'm going to present to you today part two of Beyond the Book, Elijah, Fire from Heaven, Kings, Queens, Prophets, and Character. Not characters, but their character. What were they like from my understanding and my time with them? I want to pray first. Heavenly Father, I thank you for a wonderful time here that I can share some meaningful aspects of what I learned during this time in the Word and learning about mostly Elijah, some about Elisha, some of the other prophets as well, and how this all worked and how important it is really that we do understand some of these things. So here we go. Now, when you think about Elijah, when a lot of people think about Elijah, they think about this hairy man with a camel skin cloth, girder and leather. Probably had a nice little dagger, sword on his sheath. A man that lived in the wilderness most of the time, and that's pretty much it. And I just don't think that really portrays the man the way he really was. So I thought it'd be nice to look at some of the biblical scriptural references to him. First in the New Testament, which brings me to one point I'd like to make before we get too far into this. For some reason, some notion, people tend to think that that the Old Testament isn't really important to us. In fact, sometimes they refer to the verse that it's only written for our learning. Like learning isn't important. It is important. The Old Testament is the New Testament concealed. The New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. And here's the point I'd like to make before we move on here. It's one book. The Bible is one book. So let's look at some of these verses. Look at James, if you wouldn't mind, 5:13. James said, 5:17. James said, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain. For 3 years and 6 months it did not rain on the earth. Then he prayed again, and heaven gave rain, and the earth bore its fruit. And it's interesting to me to note that this, when I look at this verse of scripture and think deeply about it, it says that, first of all, Elijah's nature was like ours, so he was like us. And that's what's important about learning about some of these individuals in the Bible, Old Testament or New Testament. He was like us. And he prayed fervently that it might not rain. And it didn't rain. And then he prayed again, and the heavens gave forth rain. So I was always asking myself, whose idea was this anyway? Was this Elohim's idea? Was this God's idea, Yahweh? Or was this Elijah's idea? And I'm still not sure, and I've never really made a decision about it, so I let it be. Second of all, let's look at let's look at here. We'll look at Malachi chapter 4. And this is that transition, that 400 years where there was no prophet in the earth. There was no written word. But before that, Malachi said, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and the hearts of children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. Now, it's interesting to note, the Jewish people thought that Elijah was going to come back in person, that he was going to come back. Now remember, when he left, when they crossed the river and went over to the other side of the Jordan River, and he was taken up in a chariot, and he disappeared with those flaming horses in the chariot. When Elisha, his protege, came back over, they said, "Where is he? Well, we got to find him. Where did he go?" Nobody had really was thinking that he went to heaven. They just thought he disappeared. We better find him. And Elisha said, well, you're not going to find him, because he knew what had happened. Anyway, so people thought that he was going to come back to Israel. So and even in Zechariah, when Zechariah says, I believe Luke chapter 1, it was when John the Baptist was to be born, and Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and when he saw the angel. Remember that? And the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah. And this is actually in Luke chapter 1, verse 12 and 13. He says, don't be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear a son, and you shall call his name John. And you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be a great before the Lord. And he must not drink wine nor strong drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb, and he will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. And he will go before him in the spirit and the power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared. So when you think about this, they were expecting Elijah to come back. They expected that he would come back before the Lord. Now, what's interesting is that when Jesus said to the disciples, who do you say I am? And they said, one said, well, somebody says you're Jeremiah, but another person says you're Elijah. And he said, but who do you say I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And so they were questioning whether he was Elijah. That's why Elijah plays such an important part. And then you go to the Mount of Transfiguration. Let's go to that verse here. And we'll look at in Mark chapter 9, verse 4, and there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For he did not know what to say because they were terrified. And then, of course, the cloud overshadowed him, and God said, this is my beloved son, listen to him. But the point is two really neat things about this that I love. Number one, who is on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus and the 3 disciples? It's Moses and Elijah. And I always thought during my study, he was emulating Moses. He believed, Moses was like his, in our modern terminology, we say he was his hero. Moses was Elijah's hero. Now, he didn't think of him as a hero probably, but he was certainly emulating him. He was following him. He wanted to be like Moses. And this is so neat because here he is on the Mount of Transfiguration with Moses talking to Jesus. You can see how important it was and how Elijah fits within the realm of our day and time, because we're looking at this from the perspective of how can we be more like someone like Elijah or like Jesus Christ, who we're really trying to emulate, or the Apostle Paul or anybody else, so that we elevate our abilities to, walk with our Heavenly Father. So he could be by himself for days and days and days, months and months, like we looked in one of the episodes where he was up on that river. It's not a river. It's the Wadi. It's a small creek. I have a creek just similar to this in my backyard. Our backyard. When the water comes down, and it's during the normal course of a regular day, there's water in there and it trickles down. But when it rains, man, that thing fills up with water. That wadi fills up that creek down there. And a wadi is simply the word for creek in the Hebrew. That's what they called it, the wadi where he was at. So he stayed there for a long time. Think about this. He was 40 days in the desert getting to Mount Horeb. To what? To Moses's, where Moses had gone with the children of Israel and had gone up into the mountains and gotten the 10 Commandments. Because that's where he went when things got really, really bad and he didn't want to live anymore. He didn't want to do his job anymore. And finally that angel said, you got more work to do. So he got up and he left and he went to Mount Horeb. He went to see God. He wanted to see God in person. He wanted to talk to God in person, although God talked to him quite a bit. He was a great mentor, wasn't he? To Elisha. He mentored Elisha and helped him to continue on after he left. And he was a great man of courage. That's what I see all the time with what he did. But he was an emotional man too, because he became full of fear. At the same time, he comes down from Mount Carmel. We talked about that previously. And then Queen Jezebel says, I'm after you. You're a dead man. And he took off in fear. So important things to note about this man. How do we deal with some of the things that come up in our lives? He walked in bold faith. This was a man who walked in bold faith. Think about this. He's up on top of Mount Carmel by himself. And the 450 prophets of Baal are coming up there. The people are up there. So, but still, he was up there by himself against all these people. He spoke the truth with courage, didn't he? He spoke the truth with courage. He was never afraid to speak the truth. And he passed the mantle on to the next generation. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Now, let's look at a couple other people here that are important, okay? In terms of character, understanding what these people were like when we're reading these records. Now, let's look at the kings. Now, you can go to your anywhere and find a list of the kings of Israel. Both Israel, Judah, when the kingdom split up. We're talking about King Ahab right now, because he's a unique individual in this whole story. His father was Omri. Okay, now I'm going to give you some years here to help out. He was king from 885 BC to 874 BC. Okay, he was the father of Ahab, and just as a side note, I don't want to get too far off here, but he bought the mountain in Samaria where the Samaria was actually built and where that palace was. So there's two palaces in this record. There's the palace of Samaria that Omri bought from the man, and his actual name was Shemer, and he bought that mountain for 2 shekels of silver, and he built a city and a palace up there. And the second palace was in Jezreel. And he built that later when he married Jezebel. And that was in a very fertile area. It was also on a hill, and it was a very lovely place to live. It was cooler there too during the summer, as far as I understand it. So Ahab was king with his father as co-regent for a time. All right? He promoted Baal worship opposed by Elijah. And then you have, now we're talking about Ahab, okay, 874 to 853. Ahaziah, Ahab's son, actually Ahab and Jezebel's son, rebuked by Elijah, died after falling from a lattice. I think we covered that in episode 3 where we went through the travels and where they went. And Jehoram. Now Jehoram I don't cover very much in the book. I do a little bit. But he's 852 to 841. Ahab was a king who would be considered by them successful. But it says he was the most evil king of all. And we read through that last time. But I want to make this point about how some of this happened. And I'm trying to find the verse here. Right here. Okay. It talks about Ahab in 1 Kings chapter 21. There was none who sold himself to do that which was evil in the sight of the Lord like Ahab, whom Jezebel his wife incited. He acted very abominably in going after idols, as the Amorites had done, whom the Lord cast out before the people of Israel. So he was an evil man. We already know that, and Jezebel had him under control. Okay, and remember what happened is that Ahab wanted Naboth. Now remember, Naboth had a vineyard in next to the palace in Jezreel. Okay, this is sort of a side story, but it becomes very important in the record of Elijah and Ahab. Because at the time, Elijah is on Mount Horeb speaking with God. Ahab has told Naboth that he wants that vineyard, okay? And Naboth says, no way, you're not getting it because it's in my family. I can't give it to you. It's illegal. A king can't even ask for someone's property like that. You can't give it away. It was supposed to stay with the tribe it originated with. So Ahab gets all upset, goes inside. And this is Ahab for you. He goes inside to the palace, and we're not going to read this record right now, but he goes inside the palace, lays down on his bed, and won't eat or drink. His servant comes in, what's the matter? And he says, I don't want anything. He gets all pissy and he's all upset. He won't eat or drink. And the servant tells Jezebel, the king's he's distraught. He's upset. He's all. So Jezebel comes in and asks him what's wrong. And as usual, he's pouting. This is Ahab. If he doesn't get it away, he starts pouting. First of all, I've mentioned this before. He was a brilliant politician. He worked every side, every angle. With Jezebel, with everything that he did, he always had a fallback position. So here's one thing I want to make a note of. After Jezebel had Naboth and his sons killed by some of her Baal-worshipping heads of state down in the town of Jezreel, Ahab got his vineyard. He was all excited. Well, God wasn't too happy about that. He sent Elijah back, and one of the things he asked him to do, amongst a number of others, was you go tell Ahab he's a dead man. He's done. His family's done. And he actually tells him how he's going to die and what it's going to be like for him and Jezebel, which is a prophecy that God tells Elijah. And he tells Ahab, you're a done man. And when Ahab heard those words, now I'm reading out of 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 27. Like I shared with you before, things are not in chronological order. You have to kind of figure your way through this. And when Ahab heard those words, he tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his flesh and fasted and lay in sackcloth and went about dejectedly. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring the disaster in his days, but in his son's days I will bring the disaster upon his house. So Ahab got a reprieve. Interesting, isn't it? So now he's still the most evil king ever, but apparently he's repented, but he never really completely repented at all. And we know that. So a couple more things about that. Let's just take a side step for a minute and talk about what will come together here in terms of this and Ahab and how he acted. Now, there was a number of battles that took place in Ahab's rule, during Ahab's rule. And I know that when you're reading some of the women, when you're reading these records, or if you're reading the novel Elijah, Fire from Heaven, there's some parts in here about these battles. This is important. Now, they weren't really wars, as I probably used that word before. They were battles. They didn't last that long. But this is very important. This gives you an idea of the character of Ahab. Because the first time, towards the beginning of this whole record, after you're done with Elijah telling Ahab it's not going to rain, The first battle of Apec was in 856, and Benadad, king of the Aram Damascus, the Syrians, not to be confused with the Assyrians, threatened Ahab, and he told him, "Listen, first of all, Ahab got messengers coming to him from his army, saying that King Benadad had amassed thousands and thousands of soldiers, 32 other kings at a place called Succoth, if I pronounce that right, on the other side of the mountain, okay, coming over to Samaria, to where the palace was, and he was told that this messenger came and said, you need to give up your wives, your house, and then Benadad won't invade and kill everybody and take over your country, essentially. So Ahab at first said, okay, I'll do this. But things kind of transpired where he was okay with giving away some of the family members, but not Jezebel. So he told some of the people from the north what was happening. Some of his generals, he was very upset with his generals for letting this massive army come his way, and he told Jezebel, and she was obviously upset. What, you're going to give me away? I mean, you know, all the gold and silver. And I don't think he really realized that they'd take Jezebel. I'm not sure about that. I don't think he did. But another messenger came, because he said, okay, I'll do that. And then another messenger came and said, okay, but, and it's really good to read the record too, because I'm kind of summarizing this. Came and said, I don't think you understood what we said. You got to give over everything. All your wives, all your gold, all your silver, everything. And we're going to come in and take whatever we want. Now, this changed the whole thing, because now what was going to happen was the whole army was going to come in. First, they were just going to come to his palace, he thought. Because, look, King Benadad's got a massive army. He's got not only his army, with massive amounts of chariots. The spies have spied him out. They've got more chariots than we've ever seen. He's got 32 other kings with him, with all their armies, and they're just all hanging out in Succoth, having a party. Probably had lots of big tents, and anyway, and so they're coming, and so he amasses all his people from the north. He delays them, masses his people, and they all say, no, you can't give this away, and they decide to fight. And he comes up, a prophet tells him, you're going to be victorious. And he comes up with this great plan. And his plan is to fight them on this road that goes up into the mountain that comes up from Succoth. So that whole army that's going to come is not going to go all the way around for days and days and days, because they think they got this done. You can't. He's got some little group of army. He doesn't have that many people. And so they plan this thing. He plans this thing. He comes up with this great idea. He's a good general. He really is. I mean, he got that from his father, Omri. So up this mountain road, they trick Benadad and his army, and the army of Benadad comes down the road with chariots and horses, while King Benadad's back having a party with all his other kings. They're sending all their men to do this, their generals, and they don't need to do it. This is a wipeout. They get stuck in this road, in this fight, and this only takes place over a couple of hours. And then, because of the way Ahab has placed all his soldiers up on the mountain, and with their archers, they wipe them out and they confuse them, and they all start running and falling over the cliff down into the valley, and they try to escape, and it causes this big, massive retreat. And so they retreat up this road, and it's a mess, and they get back to Succoth, and King Benadad sees them rushing, all his generals rushing by. A couple stop, and they all retreat to this other town. And it's a victory for Ahab against unheard of odds. So That's the first battle. Then there's the second battle, which I won't go into right now. Basically, just simply, Ben-Hadad comes back less than a year, about a year later, and wants to fight him on the plains because he says that was a bad place for us to fight. We don't do really well up in the mountains. We were better on the plains. And he brought more kings again, and he brought chariots, and they got beaten. Ahab tricked him again, outflanked him. And the third battle, the battle of Ramoth Gilead, which he was in, he dies. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, let's tie this together. God told Elijah, here's the thing. He's going to die. Ahab said he repented. And then here's what he does. He calls the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat's son, marries Ahab's sister, not his daughter. She was his sister, Athaliah. They have an alliance. Why he did that, meaning why Jehoshaphat would even make an alliance with Ahab, is really a big mistake. But anyway, he did. So Ahab calls Jehoshaphat and says, listen, I need your help. Now remember, time is going by in these situations. They're not happening one after another. There's little bits of time. And so Jehoshaphat comes with his daughter and his son, and they go to the palace of Ahab and Jezebel, and they have a great time, and then Ahab brings them off to the side. Now, this is the shrewd politician, and he says to Jehoshaphat, hey, listen, I need your help because I need to take Ramoth Gilead back. Because Ben-Hadad's father promised me he'd give it back to us. Ben-Hadad, after I beat him the second time and let him go, and God was furious about that he let him go instead of killing him. He was still alive. He won't give me back Ramoth Gilead. Can you help me? Would you help me? We're family, right? We're family. And so the thing about it is Jehoshaphat says, sure, I'll help you. I'll give you, my army will join your army. What's yours is mine, mine's yours. So the thing is that Ahab tricks Jehoshaphat before the battle. And there's other things that take place before that in terms of the prophets prophesying whether they should go or not, and that's another story I'll leave for now. He tells him, listen, Jehoshaphat, you go ahead and lead. All right, you lead everybody. And you put on your kingly costume. Because now remember, Ahab was told that he's going to die. Remember? He doesn't know when. He thought he got a reprieve. Maybe he's going to be good for this one too. Probably. But let's just be careful. Okay? So Jehoshaphat, you go ahead and wear all the priestly garb. I'll just dress up in my regular stuff, and I'll just take a smaller chariot without a bunch of stuff. The battle begins. They're looking for Ahab to kill him, meaning Ben-Hadad's and his men. And instead, and why in the world Ben-Hadad's still alive after all this time? It's unbelievable that he let him live, because he's after him again. These soldiers they think they find Ahab, but then one of the commanders says, that's not Ahab. That's somebody else. So don't shoot him. Don't shoot Jehoshaphat, who turns around and gets the heck out of there. Because he realizes they're all after him now, because he's now the main king. Because Ahab's not really a king. He's not in his kingly chariot. He doesn't have his kingly flags. He doesn't have his kingly armor. I mean, not armor, but his, all the procurements he would have on that big chariot of his. And so Jehoshaphat flees. Ahab decides to come up a little bit further to maybe participate as the general he should. And he gets hit by an errant arrow right under the arm, right beneath where his shield covered him, right in near the heart. And he slumps back in his chariot, and it doesn't take long to realize he's a goner. He's done. So eventually that night, and he went back to the front, give him credit for that. He says, I'm dead anyway. Take me to the front. I'm leading this group. And it wasn't a very good outcome. They all fled. And he died that day. He went back to town and died. And his son became the king. So that kind of shows you how that prophecy worked. And with Ahab and Elijah, and came to pass there at the end there. Let's talk a little bit about Jezebel for a minute, because she was a very shrewd, very intelligent, very smart, not afraid queen, and she manipulated really well. And eventually, I think the thing that struck me the most is when she was ready to be killed, and she knew that Jehu, who was the last king in this record of these kings during this time, was coming to kill her, and got all painted up and went to the window. And when Jehu arrived at her palace, she was up in the window, and she knew she was going to die, and she mocked him. She mocked Jehu. He yelled at him, "Throw her out," and they finally did throw her out. They threw her out the window, and she died just as it had been prophesied. She was eaten by dogs, and that was the end of her. And when he went in to eat something after they had thrown her out, and he just left her on the sidewalk, trampled her with his horse, and went inside to eat. And when he came out, the only thing left was her hand and a few bones. The dogs had eaten her. So she got her just end. And finally, in regards to these characters and how they operated and how they lived their lives, I just remind you that that as far as Elijah was concerned, and that's really what we focus on. We want to take out about these people's lives, what they did and how we can apply it to our own, right? I mean, that's the whole idea. I mean, otherwise, what's the point? We want to emulate great men and women of the Bible, mighty men and women of the Bible. And so as we read and we put this on in our hearts and minds, hopefully that's what happens. Elijah was obedient. In obscurity, he was obedient in difficult situations. He was obedient when he went to Zarephath to stay with the widow woman, who he probably stayed with well over a year, maybe 2 years. He was emotionally honest when he told God, "I've had enough. I can't do this anymore." He was emotionally. It's interesting because when he was with in Zarephath with the widow, who was like I had shared before, this was no older woman. Okay, she was a young woman. If her son was 10 years old and she had him when she was 10, she was 25. If she was 15, okay, if he was 10, he was 8. So she was 8. She was 23, 24. It's hard to tell because it doesn't say when she was married or any of that. But when her son died, he was emotionally involved. I mean, that record of when he healed her son was the first record in the Bible of anyone being healed by someone else. That's the first record. And he was spiritually focused. And I think I'd like to end with that. Here's a man that was focused on only one thing, and I shared this previously in the third episode, and that was this. There was nothing more important to Elijah than to please God, to please Yahweh, to follow him, to do as he was asked to do. And I think that's why he got the ending that he did. Think about this. I mean, honestly, all these great men who got taken away in a chariot. Who got taken away in the chariot? It was Elijah. And who ended up on the mountain transfiguration with Moses? It was Elijah. So that's why I spent the time I did writing the novel and Elijah, Fire from Heaven. And I really enjoyed the time doing it. I love doing the research. It's fun. Going through the records and thinking, praying. How does this really work? I mean, are we making something up here that is implausible, or is it really true? How this man thought in his mind, because he was by himself a lot. So he prayed a lot. He was obedient. His desire was to please God, and he was spiritually charged. Thank you.